Hi everyone, this is just a quick video taking you through two of the key questions on the English language paper 1 exam paper. Now this video is being created for anyone that is studying explorations in creative reading and writing, that is with the AQA exam board, and we're going to focus on question 1 and question 2. If you'd like to actually watch the lesson for question 3, 4 and 5, then please subscribe and check out the next video which will be uploaded next week. So first of all, what questions will you have to answer? When you're doing English language and English lit at the same time, it can be very difficult to keep track of all the different questions that you need to answer. So it's important just to go over them and just to recap the main things that you're going to be focusing on. So for paper 1, these are the main questions that you have to answer. For English language, you have two papers. So the first one is explorations in creative reading and writing. That's what we're going to focus on in this video, and that has 5 questions. So you can see there, question 1 is identify explicit information, by which we mean obvious pieces of information. Now this is normally going to come from the first 5 to 6 lines of the extract, and it's worth 4 marks. With that in mind, you should aim to spend about 5 minutes on this question. For question 2, you're going to identify and comment on language techniques. This question is worth 8 marks, and you want to spend about 10 minutes answering this question. Question 3 is identifying and commenting on the effect of structure. It's worth 8 marks, and just like question 2, you want to spend about 10 minutes answering this question. Question 4, this can often be quite a difficult one, because what you're being asked to do is to evaluate the writer's methods. So first of all, what you're going to be faced with is a statement based on the text that you've read. So a student or a hypothetical student will have read the same extract that you have read. They'll come up with a statement about the actual extract, and the first thing you'll need to do is to decide whether you agree or disagree with what that student has said, and see if you can actually comment on the effects of either the language or the structural techniques relating back to the expression that the student has used. This question is worth 20 marks. So for this question, you want to spend about 20 minutes doing it. You want to aim to do something along the lines of 3 to 4 paragraphs. Question 5, our last one. This is the really big creative writing question. It's worth a massive 40 marks, which is 50% of the exam paper, and you have to think about describing either an image or a scenario, and you get 24 marks for your content and organisation. So that is things like how have you structured it, how have you used certain techniques and methods to get your ideas across, and 16 marks for your spelling, grammar and punctuation. Now we're going to take a look at question 1. Read the extract and attempt the question when you're ready. So, often in the exam, you're going to be asked to look at the first 5 to 6 lines, and then you'll be asked to identify some information either about the central character or the environment that is being described. So if you have a look at the question below, it says, read lines 1 to 5, identify 4 things about Tommy. In the exam, you'll get 5 minutes to answer this, so if you'd like to pause the video once I've finished reading out the text, you're more than welcome to do so. Take your time and try and figure out what 4 things are available for this question. So it says, Tommy was surrounded by darkness. Stretching his arms out in front of him, his fingers sought out something familiar, something to help guide him. His heart was beating so loud he was sure the sound would wake the whole house. Wiping a bead of sweat from his long, angular nose, he forced himself to keep moving. He had only one chance, just this one moment to make things right, and the possibility of failing filled him with dread. If you'd like to spend some more time looking through this extract and trying to identify your 4 things, that is fine. This video is now going to jump ahead to take a look at the answers. Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones provided. Answers may include, but are not limited to, he was surrounded by darkness. His heart was beating loudly. He is sweating. He has a long nose. He has an angular nose. He was filled with dread. So as you can see there, at the top of the response, we have the line saying answers may include, but are not limited to. Now this is a typical line that you might find in any kind of mark scheme provided by AQA, especially for question 1. And what that means is that even though you're only supposed to identify 4 things from the extract, there might be more things that are actually available. Question 1 is a really nice, easy one, straightforward question to help get you thinking and to help you engage with the text. So it's likely that there are going to be more than 4 correct answers, but that means even if it's not on the mark scheme, it still might be a correct answer, and it will be down to the examiner to make the appropriate decision as to whether that actually applies to the question. A key way to think about this is, does it actually refer to the lines that are specified and the focus of the question that you're asked to actually think about? Now what I'd like you to do is just have a look at the language techniques on the left hand side and try to think about which definitions that are on the right hand side could they match up to. This is going to help us out when we move on and have a look at question 2, which has the main focus of language techniques in it. Again, if you'd like to pause the video here and to go through it at your own rate, that's absolutely fine. I'm going to move ahead now and start talking through the answers. So for the first one, we have imagery. So the definition for imagery is, this is where the writer has used descriptive language to create an image in the reader's head. Secondly, we have the word oxymoron, and the definition for that is when 2 words are used to create a contrasting effect. So we mean you can either have something very positive and something very negative, or something like that, something with complete difference between the 2 words, generally is classed as an oxymoron. Number 3 is sibilance. Now a lot of people get this confused with alliteration, and it is kind of the same as alliteration, but more specifically, alliteration is where you use repetition of the same word more than once, whereas sibilance is specifically where you're repeating the letter S in 2 closely linked words. The next one is metaphor. This is a form of figurative language comparing something to something else without using like or as. And finally, we have personification, which of course is going to be a form of figurative language when you assign human qualities to something non-living. You'll notice with things like personification and metaphor, both of these have the term figurative language in the actual definition, and what that means is that we're not being literal. So when we use a metaphor, for example, you might say the man is a giant. We don't mean in a literal sense that he's actually a giant. What we mean by that is that he's very, very tall. If we think about personification, and a very typical one that people use are things like the sun smiled. In a very literal sense, the sun cannot smile, but it has been used there to create the impression in the reader's head that the sun is, happy and joyful and bringing out a lot of rays of sunshine and brightness onto the landscape. What I'd also like you to do is try and think, now that we've matched up some of those language techniques, are there any additional language techniques you can remember? There are many, many language techniques that could come up in your exam, so the more you're aware of, the more you can remember, the better you're going to be when you come to do your exam. Now we're going to move on and have a look at question 2. So question 2 says, look at lines 14 to 21. How has the writer used language here to describe how Tom is feeling? A good thing to do when you're focusing on this question is just try to identify what is the main focuses of the question. So if this was me in the exam, first of all, I'd underline this term here, language. So this tells me that in this question, I need to be thinking about things like word class and language techniques and how they're actually used to also describe Tommy's feelings. So these are going to be the 2 kind of main things that we need to be looking out for when we read through the extract. So the extract says, the floorboard gave a weak groan of annoyance as Tommy moved around upstairs. He knew he shouldn't be here, that even the floor was reminding him of that, but he couldn't turn back now. Too much had been taken from him and he wasn't leaving until he had what he came for. The house was horribly beautiful. How could a criminal live in such luxury? The walls were adorned with fine artwork that screamed success. Tommy doubted Harry knew anything about art, but then that wasn't the point, was it? The art was merely a signal, a sign to others that said, look how much I have. The thought made Tommy feel sick to his stomach, but his heart had turned to stone. Harry couldn't be allowed to get away with everything. What I'd like you to do now is to try to pause the video and see if you can identify any of those language techniques that we went through earlier in this extract. It is really important for this question that you identify a minimum of 2 quotations with some important language techniques in there that you can actually apply to your own writing. If we have a look at it now, I'm going to go through and make some annotations and highlight some of the key techniques we should be aware of. So the first thing comes right in the first sentence. The floorboard gave a weak groan of annoyance. Now if we think about that, can a floorboard really groan in annoyance? What technique might that be? If you're not too sure, pause the video, have a look back at the key language techniques that we identified earlier and see if you can identify what language technique has been used there. He knew he shouldn't be here, that even the floor was reminding him of that. Again, the fact that the floor is reminding him, to remind someone of something, you need conscious thought, you need to be able to verbalize things, and that is not really something we'd say that a floorboard is able to do. Sounds quite silly when you think about it. So it's definitely going to be one of the techniques that we just looked at. But he couldn't turn back now. Too much had been taken from him, and he wasn't leaving until he had what he came for. The house was horribly beautiful. Now this is an interesting one there. When you think about the adjectives that have been used to describe the house, we've got the word horribly, and then we've got a very, very different or contrasting word next to it in the word beautiful. So again, it'll be important to think about what techniques have been used in those 2 words. It says then, how could a criminal live in such luxury? The walls were adorned with fine artwork that screamed success. And that is something that often people can get a bit tongue-tied on. When you're saying words that have a similar letter right next to each other, it can sound a little bit strange because we're forced to emphasize this kind of S sound as we speak. So again, have a think, what language technique could we be referring to here? Tommy doubted Harry knew anything about art, but then that wasn't the point, was it? The art was merely a signal, a sign to others that said, look at how much I have. The thought made Tommy feel sick to his stomach, but his heart had turned to stone. Now if we think about that message there, his heart had turned to stone. Can a heart actually turn to stone? Is that something that is actually possible? Or is that one of the techniques that we looked at a moment ago? Then it says finally, Harry couldn't be allowed to get away with everything. So again, for this question, you need to have 2 to 3 key quotations to actually respond to it in order to get a high mark. And if you have a look at the amount of things that we have highlighted there, there should be more than enough things for you to talk about when you come and actually attempt this question. Again, if you're not too sure about which techniques they're referring to, have a look at the previous part of the video where we go into this and actually identify which techniques go with which definitions. We're going to move on now and we're going to have a look at how to actually write your response, and we're going to look at an example that's going to help you to think about how you're going to structure it effectively to get the best marks possible. So the first thing we want to focus on is the question. So again, this is the same question that we went through when we started to annotate the extract. How has the writer used language here to describe how Tom is feeling? Many different schools will use their own version of the paragraph structure. The one that we're going to focus on today, however, is known as a piece paragraph. If you're not too sure what we mean by that, don't worry, because we're going to go through it now, and it might be something that you find quite useful and helpful, and if that is the case, then that's fantastic. But if you want to stick with the own structure that you use in your day-to-day lives and your normal English lessons, that's absolutely fine as well. So first of all, very similar to a lot of other paragraph structures, the P stands for point. So first thing you're going to do when you're writing your paragraph is you're going to make a clear link to the question. If you're not mentioning the question, or at least part of the question in your point, then it's not really showing the examiner that you know what you need to speak about. Okay, so a real good thing to do is to use part of the actual exam question in your point, and that also gives yourself a little bit of time to think about the rest of the question, because if anything, you're just recycling part of the question in your own point. Evidence. So again, very similar to a lot of other structures that you'll probably use in your normal English lessons. So select a judicious quotation to support your point. When we say judicious, this is an important word. It is the word that will actually appear in the mark scheme, and judicious means a really good, appropriate quotation that will help you respond to this question effectively. The next one is author's methods. So think about the method that the writer has used within the quotation and try and explain the effects of the method and the technique and how that actually helps us to understand how Tom is feeling. Connotations. Now this is where you're going to zoom in on a key word. You're going to talk about what that word means. You're hopefully going to be able to talk about the word class, and you're going to tell me what kind of things you associate with that word and how that can build our understanding of how Tom is feeling at this moment. And the final one is effect on the reader. So explain how the reader reacts to this and make a link back to the question. Okay, it's important to make a link back to the question. It's just reminding the examiner that you know what you need to talk about and you're not going to go on just a mad tangent about anything old thing, that you're actually thinking carefully about your writing and that you're structuring it effectively. So now we're going to look at an actual student response. Now this is by no means a perfect response. So as we go through it, I just want you to think, is it successful? What makes it successful? And does it follow the piece paragraph structure? So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to think about the point. So the point says, the writer has used an oxymoron to describe how Tom's feeling. So far we know that it's being effective because it has made a link to the question, and it's also mentioned an appropriate technique as well. As this is the language question, we need to make sure that we're talking about an appropriate language technique. Next one is the evidence. The house was horribly beautiful. So this quotation has come from the extract that we've just looked through. And what you really need to think about is this a really good quotation? Is this one of the judicious quotes, one of the best quotes that are available to them in that part of the extract? Next is the author's methods. So the oxymoron has been used to show how conflicted Tom is feeling. If we remember from our previous tasks, when we were matching up the techniques to the key definitions, we know that an oxymoron is when you have a contrast between two words. So you can see there that it does kind of show that Tom is feeling conflicted. The next one is connotations. So you can see here that the candidate has zoomed in, they've found a key word, and they're going to explore what they associate with that word. So in addition, the adjective horribly has connotations of annoyance and disgust. Then finally, you're going to think about the effect on the reader and link it back to the question. So this makes the reader understand that Tom is feeling both rage and envy in this part of the source. And if we think back to the actual stem of the question, is it talking about how Tom is feeling? It does seem to be doing that, so I'd just like to spend a minute having a look over the example. If you'd like to get a little bit of practice, then by all means use the piece paragraph structure, use the student example, and see if you can write one paragraph by yourself just to get that bit of practice. If you haven't been shown this before, it might be important to have a look at the mark scheme. So this is what the teacher or examiner is going to use to help determine the grade that you're going to be given. So this actually goes all the way up to level 4, and you can see there at the top, level 4 is where you'll be awarded 7 to 8 marks. And this is assuming that you've wrote 2, possibly 3 really good analytical paragraphs based on the question. So it says there in the skill descriptor that you show perceptive and detailed understanding of language. So that means that you've identified a really good quotation, you've analysed the effects of the writer's choice, and you've made some sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. So that's right there at the top of the mark scheme. A little bit lower down then, for level 3, it's going to get you a 5 or 6 marks out of 8. And we can see here that the language in the skill descriptor is starting to change a bit. So rather than showing a perceptive and detailed understanding, it's changed to shows a clear understanding of language. So you can see there that it's kind of asking for a little bit less, or saying that if you achieve that level of a level 3, then you're still not quite reaching the mark of level 4. So that one says, explains clearly the effects of the writer's choices of language, selects a range of relevant textual details, make clear and accurate use of subject terminology. Now, even though a level 3 is probably not what we're aiming for, we should always aim for the top mark, it still says here that you need to use a range of relevant textual detail. So what that means is that if you write one paragraph with just one quotation, that's not going to be enough to get you a level 3. You need to make sure that you're doing a minimum of 2 quotations, because we really need to show the examiner that you understand the most important quotations and the most important techniques and methods that have been used in that quote. Then you've got level 2, so this is 3 to 4 marks. As a bare minimum on this question, you need to make sure you're getting 4 marks, because then you can get 50% on this question. On the whole paper, you need 50% as a minimum to get a pass. So it says in the skill descriptor, show some understanding of language. Again, so you can see there for each of the skill descriptor, it's kind of gone down a little bit for each level. So attempts to comment on the effect of language, select some appropriate textual detail, make some use of subject terminology, mainly appropriately. And it's this difference between words like some and attempts that tells us that the person's not really doing really thorough analysis when they come to the question. So when you are attempting this question, you need to be aware of what is available on the mark scheme, and you need to think very carefully about what you need to do in order to get the best marks possible. If you need any additional support or help, then new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, you can leave us a comment below or visit our partner channel Bookworm Teaching for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks for listening, guys, and best of luck with all your revision in the future.